So, the development of what we would call stratified societies in Upper Egypt is largely represented by the Naqada culture. And if we kind of look at the Nakata culture, we can see it's divided into three broad phases. In phase one, we see the development of small Chalcolithic villages. Remember, that means they're producing copper locally. And most of that copper is coming from here in the Sinai Peninsula. There's extensive copper mines that would become, in a lot of ways, the source of wealth for most of the kingdoms of Egypt. And we can see them being exploited extremely early on here during the Naqada I. But in addition to copper, we see a couple other structural changes. We see the introduction of mud brick architecture. So the wattle and daub and reed style houses that we saw in the Rimde and the Mahdi cultures of Lower Egypt in the area here inside of the Delta, we now see in Upper Egypt being built out of mud brick. And now this has a couple of effects. One is that archaeologically it preserves better. So we have a much more extensive evidence for the settlements here. Two, right, it also means that these settlements are more permanent. They stay in one place for a longer period of time. So that also kind of leads to this kind of accident of preservation. The other thing that we see in the Naqada one is the introduction of rowboats. And those rowboats are really a test to the amount of trade that's flowing up and down the Nile River Valley, but also coming across the Red Sea. And that trade is likely originating with Uruk, Mesopotamia. We see the introduction of a lot of Uruk style artifacts like cylinder seals and, in particular, cosmetic palettes. And these are incredibly important, as we'll talk about, with the Narmer palette representing the end of this, the Naqada III proto dynastic unification of Egypt. And now in the Naqada II, we can kind of see this as those small scale elite institutions are finally put into place. We have people who are controlling most of the economic produce of society and redistributing it, likely by controlling religious ceremony. So we have these elite institutions, elite burial practices, the earliest necropolises and royal burials of Egypt, all show up here in the Naqada II, beginning sometime around 3500 BCE. And what we see is several of these small competing polities, like Hierakonpolis, here Nakata, and Abydos, all kind of competing for power within this kind of sphere. And then it's all put together in what is called the Proto-Dynastic or Naqada III period. But we're going to focus most of today's class on the Naqada II, or the Jezra culture. So we have a slow expansion of the Nakata culture from Upper Egypt into Lower Egypt, and this is really kind of setting the stage for the unification of Egypt under Narmer around 3200 BCE. So we have several large population centers, and we'll talk more explicitly about Hierakonpolis here in a little bit, but also Abydos, Thebes, and Nakata, and we believe these all to be kind of small independent polities. So you can think about these as small chiefdoms or states, to however you want to kind of frame the processes that are going on there. And it's likely the trade with Mesopotamia and the Levant, Jordan, Israel, into Syria, that we see fueling these elite displays of power. The goods and resources that are coming in to the Nile Delta from the Fertile Crescent are kind of propping up these elite institutions. So just for example here, you can see the cylinder seal. This is a traditional Mesopotamian style of seal, but it's done here out of local stone and carved with a local Egyptian iconography. And you can see the reverse of the ceiling as you roll it out on the clay. It produces an image, a repeating scene. So you can kind of see here the seat of power, an individual seated on the throne, overseeing the fields, the river, the animals, and the livestock here within the Naqada II period. So we have this kind of local manifestation of power represented on a foreign style of object, an Uruk Mesopotamian style cylinder seal. And this, the influence here of Mesopotamian power is shown even more on the object you see here, found in one of the burial tombs at Abydos. This is an ivory dagger handle, and in it you can see the Mon in Nuts Rockin', the man in the net skirt of Uruk, Mesopotamia, and he is fighting these lions, and you can see all of the below him, the bulls, and all of the supernatural aspects of the natural world are kind of brought unto bear by the king of the state. And on the flip side of the dagger handle, you can see his control over people. You have soldiers with mace heads. You can see it here, walking through bound naked captors and people engaged in hand-to-hand combat. All of this under the banner of the Rook King. So this Rook symbol of power shows up in the burials at Abydos, here in the Naqada II period. So we can see this kind of extensive connections. And this allowed local rulers to control access to long distance trade, but then eventually also subsistence practice and through extensive redistribution measures and centralized institutions. So we can see at the site of Hierakonpolis, which we'll discuss in a little bit, how this kind of operated. That also propped up these huge, elaborate burials, systems of monumental tombs, and large scale labor investment that kind of set the stage for the later Old Kingdom pharaohs and the pyramids. So, all this starts to come together during the Naqada II culture.